This is Donald Blair. Donald's from Germantown. Donald's 94 years old. He landed on D-Day, Omaha Beach, as an unarmed medic on the first wave. This is Lee Mendenhall from Middletown. Lee was an infantryman who landed after D-Day and fought through the German defenses through Brittany Peninsula up through Normandy. So later on you're going to have an opportunity to speak to these two fine gentlemen. They don't bite. Donald's a young 94 and Lee's a young 91. And you'll probably never meet another D-Day veteran, so you got to savor this moment. They do sign autographs and they don't charge, by the way. So, all right. Somebody tell me something about D-Day. One thing. I know somebody's got a burning, I know you got something to tell me. Tell me about D-Day.
There were 3 different Allied countries involved, Canada, the United States, and Britain. There were 5 main beaches that were attacked that day.
Very good. Excellent. If he says any more, I'm not going to have the class to give. Let's back up a little. Before D-Day, 1943, the Allies were fighting in North Africa. Anybody remember what the operation was called where we landed in North Africa? 1942, Combined Amphibious Parachute Assault. Operation Torch. Operation Torch. So the Allies landed in North Africa. After very heavy fighting in Tunisia, the Allies were able to secure North Africa from the Germans. In 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily. In June 1943, Sicily on the southern end of Italy to gain a foothold in the Mediterranean. Combined Parachute Amphibious Assault. British, American, Free French. In 1942 to 1944, let me pull this up. This is what Europe looked like. This is Great Britain, England, Scotland, Ireland, Spain. This is the continent. This is France, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, Germany, all the way to the east. This is Russia. The red area is all the area that was controlled by Nazi Germany. So they controlled from the Spain-French border all the way to within Moscow, up until in 1942, within about 25 miles outside Moscow. Think about that. The massive amount of land that they controlled, which means the people that in those countries were oppressed. What do you think it was like to live under the Nazis? It was terrible. They used the populations as slave laborers. If you were from Poland, if you were from Czechoslovakia, a very good chance that you're going to be sent to a slave labor camp back in Germany to work in the factories, to work in armaments production. The Nazis bilked all of the natural resources from the countries. They took their oils, they took their food. It was truly tyranny. They lived under oppression. So all of Europe was under this black shadow. There was 2 shining beacons. One was England. England never gave up. In 1940, the Nazis attempted to suppress England with air attacks. It was called the Battle of Britain. 400 fighter pilots held off the German Air Force, known as the Luftwaffe. Winston Churchill said, "Never have so many owed so much to so few." It was called the Battle of Britain, because Hitler's plan was, after he took France in 1940, was to take England. But England held out. England would not give in. The Russians, after terrible losses and disasters, were finally starting to hold the line. But there was a lot of pressure on the Russians because the Germans were sending most of their forces to the east to fight the Russians. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. This is the insignia. This is a sword with flames signifying the piercing of Europe. This was a headquarters that was established in England in 1942. It was a combined headquarters that controlled English, American, Canadian, Norwegian, Polish, Free French, Allied forces from all over the world to defeat the Nazis in Europe. The commander was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Very important man in American history. General Eisenhower was a West Point graduate, World War I veteran, but he never really had any combat time. He was from the little town of Salina, Kansas. Anybody ever been to Salina, Kansas? There's not a lot out there, but he has a museum out there. General Eisenhower was picked. The combined staff included General Montgomery from the British Army, Air Marshal Tedder from the Royal Air Force, General Bradley. These were all experienced staff officers and commanders. England became a staging ground for the invasion of Europe. The Americans sent division after division after division to England. Munitions, vehicles, aircraft to prepare for the freeing of Europe from Nazi tyranny. All over southern England, American units were stationed. And remember, the British were active in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. So now, the Americans are providing the bulk of the forces, not all the forces, but the bulk of the forces for the invasion of Europe. General Eisenhower, one of the reasons General Eisenhower was picked, and Churchill and President Roosevelt had to agree on this, was he was a very easy-mannered individual, very easy to get along with. He was very intelligent, but he could mold all these personalities, General Montgomery, General Patton, General Bradley, he could mold all these different personalities and the nationalities into this fighting force. The Free French were a nightmare to control. The Free French wanted to do, they had very few forces, but they wanted to obviously to free their country ahead of, schedule, without really adhering to any plans. The Polish were the same way. So General Eisenhower, had to take all these individuals and all these countries and all these nationalities and form this into this combined fighting instrument known as SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. They were headquartered in London, outside of London. The Atlantic Wall. Anybody know what the Atlantic Wall refers to? I know one of you Rhodes Scholars know this. Anybody ever heard the term? The Atlantic Wall ran from the French-Spanish border all the way to the tip of Holland, even part of Norway. The Atlantic Wall was a phrase used by Hitler and his staff, the beach defenses, to defend Europe against the forthcoming Allied attack. General Erwin Rommel, who had fought in the desert and was highly regarded by the British and the Americans as one of their most competent, capable commanders. And by the way, Rommel was not a Nazi. He despised the Nazis, but he was a soldier. And his oath was to defend his nation and to follow the orders of his superiors. He was ordered to Normandy. Hitler believed that the attack, when the Allies attacked France, would come in an area called the Pas de Calais, P-A-S, Decalais. Pas de Calais, perhaps. Any French scholars in here? Calais, okay. Pas de Calais. Hitler believed that that's where the attack would take place because it was the shortest distance between southern England and the French coast. So logically, you want to pick a point to attack that you can logistically support easier. Rommel wasn't so sure. The Germans began preparing France for what they perceived would be an invasion at the Pas de Calais. They started to fortify the beach defenses. These are called tetrahydrons. These are iron rafters that are welded together, iron beams. And they're put outside along the beaches to inhibit ships from approaching the beach and unloading. They prepared the beaches with these. They laid over 1 million landmines. You know, landmines, usually some are wooden, some are metal. Put them underground, explosive devices, vehicles, ships, or men step on them and they explode. The Germans used forced labor battalions from France. They used a special unit called Organisation Tat, which was a German labor corps. But Rommel oversaw these defenses, and Rommel was a sharp general, very, very astute. So that's a tetrahedron. One of the things that the Germans did was they built, you'll see some images here in a moment. So they laid mines, they put up tetrahedrons, they put up all manner of obstacles along the beach. They then also fortified the beaches with bunkers. These bunkers had machine guns, artillery pieces with what's called interconnecting fields of fire. So you might have a bunker covering a 500-yard area. You have another bunker that covers that bunker and overlaps the fire of that area. This creates a really effective crossfire. Germans did this all along the beaches, and the hope that this would become impenetrable and that the sacrifice and the losses would be so high the Allies wouldn't be able to invade. The German troops along the beaches were weak units. Most of them were second-rate, older, unfit really for frontline offensive combat. However, when they were put in the bunkers with their machine guns and artillery pieces, they were very effective. And if you're a young American or a British soldier and you're assaulting across a 300, 400-yard beach, you don't get a sense of how old or young this soldier is that's shooting at you. You just know you're being shot at. One of the things the Germans also did was they were worried about air attack, airborne invasion, parachute and glider. So they flooded many of the areas behind the beachhead. They flooded the areas. The Meurthe River Basin was flooded. The water was up to 4 or 5 feet deep in some places. They also took telephone poles. They cut them in half. They put mines on top of them. They put them in the ground. When the gliders would come in, a glider would hit one of those and detonate the mine on the pole. That was called Rommel's asparagus. Rommel's asparagus. Everybody knows about asparagus, the vegetable. Well, visualize a telephone pole, half the length, with a mine on the end. Then sometimes they would run wires between those. They would put these in fields and pastures where they felt gliders could land. This is a artillery bunker. This is after the invasion. You can see it's about 150 millimeter gun. Look how thick the concrete is here. This is the front of the bunker. So this was designed to for anti-personnel and anti-shipping, to attack any landing craft or ships that were off the coast. Going back. This is an observation bunker. And what this is, these were situated all on the coast. They had optical devices, binoculars, telescopes, and this is what the Germans would use to observe for the enemy approaches. This is what they would call in the fire for the artillery. And again, See the slits right here? These are the observation ports. Look how thick that concrete is. This is another bunker with an 88 millimeter gun. Anybody know what these are on top of the bunker? Those are artillery strikes. So this is after the invasion, obviously. This is a contemporary photo. This is what it looks like when the artillery hits the bunker. You'll notice it doesn't do a lot of damage. Now, before we get to the actual invasion, the Allies began planning for D-Day in 1942. What was the name of the organization that was in charge? SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. That plan included air attacks all along the interior of France. They would bomb railroads, marshalling yards, depots, roads, bridges for months. They bombed these targets. The Allies had to be very careful what they targeted because they did not want to tip the Germans to where they were going to land. So they had to have a uniform effort. They knew what their objective was going to be. They were going to land in Normandy. This was chosen as the landing point east of the Cotentin Peninsula. Cotentin Peninsula. They were going to land. They were going to move inland. They were going to secure cities, highways, roads, and bridges to then allow the Allied army to build up and then attack eastwards through Belgium, Holland, and Germany. They had a secret organization in England. Their job was to mislead the Germans. General Patton was put in charge of this fictitious army. Tanks would be rubber. They would have these rubber models, they'd blow them up with the air. Trucks, rubber. They would create false units. They would wear fictitious, it was called the Ghost Army, by the way, the Ghost Army. They would wear fictitious insignia. They would conduct fake radio transmissions, false radio transmissions, and they would position themselves in southern England directly across from the Pas de Calais. The Germans, intelligence would pick this up and they would think they are going to attack in the Pas de Calais. This is what the Germans believe. The plan for the Allies was to land 3 airborne divisions, 2 American, 1 British. The American 82nd, 101st, British 6th Airborne Division behind the beaches. There were 5 assault beaches. I'll show you a map here in a minute. The Cotentin Peninsula. 5 assault beaches. 2 were American, which about 2.5 infantry divisions landed. They were called Utah on the west end, and then Omaha Beach. Utah, oh, you need to know this. Utah, Omaha, and then 2 British and 1 Canadian beach. Gold, Sword, and Juno. So you had 5 beaches with about 6.5 infantry divisions, engineers, tanks landing. The plan was to drop the 3 airborne divisions in early June. They would land behind the lines about 10 to 20 miles inland. They would seize bridges, seize key cities like Saint-Mary-Glisse, France, which had a 5-way, was a 5-way crossroad. They would seize the exits from the beaches to allow the beach landed forces to move off the beaches. It was set for early June. Remember, for 2 years they've planned this operation. They've planned it. They have the supplies, they have the men. The men have been training for this and training for this. The units were the American 29th Infantry Division, which was a Virginia National Guard division. 95% of the men from that division were from Virginia. There were brothers who served together in the same companies because this was a National Guard division. The American 4th Infantry Division, the British 50th Infantry Division, the Canadian 3rd Division, British Commando Brigade, Lord Lovett's Commando Brigade, the American Rangers, just on and on and on. Incredible, the resources. Thousands of ships, not only ships, but landing craft. Thousands of vehicles. Now, one of the things you have to do when you do an amphibious assault, you come across the ocean, you have to waterproof all your vehicles. Why do you think you have to do that? They won't run. They get salt water corrosion in their engines, so you had to seal, off a lot of the engine, a lot of parts of the vehicles. So where I'm going with this is all this time and preparation to free Europe. Before the invasion began, about a month out, we began dropping special forces into Normandy. We dropped American OSS and British SOE operatives. The OSS was the Office of Strategic Services, which today is the CIA. The British SOE was the Special Operations Executive. Many of their agents were of French nationality. They'd fled France, almost said Fred Flintstone. They fled Fred Flintstone fled France. They fled France, became operatives. Their job was to get in, to encourage the resistance, to ensure they were trained, they were equipped, and then they had targets. They would cut power poles, which, isolated German units from communication. They would blow bridges. They did all kinds of sabotage and subversive efforts. So now you see the build up to D-Day. Now why do you think it's called D-Day? Anybody know? Every military operation, the beginning day of the operation is D-Day. Any operation. Today, it's still D-Day. They assign code names. The D-Day operation was D-Day, then you had minus D1, minus D1, minus D2, minus D3. That's days leading up to the operation. Then D+1, D+2, D+3, days after the operation. Anybody know what the code word was for D-Day? Overlord, Operation Overlord. There was two parts of that operation. Neptune, which was the amphibious assault, and Bigot, B-I-G-O-T, which was the airborne assault. Now, who was the supreme commander of the operation? Who was the big wig in England in charge of this? I just heard it.
Eisenhower.
General Eisenhower. Eisenhower. Where was he from? Salina, Kansas. All right. So, the invasion was scheduled for 4 June. Well, guess what happened? The weather was terrible. The Atlantic Channel was bouncing up and down, raining heavily. They weren't able to insert paratroopers because of the wind and the rain. The ships were having a hard time, so they had to postpone the invasion. On June 6th, Eisenhower was told you have about a 12 to 14 hour window where you'll be able to attack. This is what the weathermen told him, the meteorologists. Eisenhower had to act immediately. He said, we will take this window. On the evening of 5 June, the paratroopers began to load up on their planes. They were equipped with hundreds of pounds of rations, munitions, weapons, maps, some extra clothing, not much. We talked last time, what's the most important piece of clothing? Socks. That's right. Wear socks. So on 5 June, all over England, the paratroopers are loading up. The British and the Americans, and also the glider soldiers are loading up. We'll talk about that briefly here. Every member of the invading force was given this proclamation. And think about if you're an 18, 19-year-old kid, you're scared to death, and you've been told the invasion is going to go on. This is what they were given. It's a small letter form. We have many downstairs in the museum. And I'm going to read this to you because I think it's very important. It tells you a lot about General Eisenhower. And it's titled Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, known as SHAPE. Very good. Oh, we got a runaway controller here. Hold on. All right. It says, soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you're about to embark upon the great crusade toward which ye have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms, pardon me, on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940 and 1941. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. Signed, Dwight D. Eisenhower. So, you're an 18-year-old soldier, airman, sailor, and you get this. It's inspiring. It tells you a lot about General Eisenhower. General Eisenhower was worried to death about this operation failing. He was also worried that he would lose many, many young men. Eisenhower tried to beat the Germans in the most cost-efficient manner without sacrificing excess numbers of men and equipment. It's hard to fight a war civilized like that, but he tried. So this was handed out. This was carried in their helmets, carried in their pockets, carried in their packs, carried on their vehicles. Let me check something out here real quick. Okay, I'm going to do the airborne assault first. So 5 June at night, 12:15, 15 minutes after midnight, 00115, 6 British Horsa gliders carrying 150 glider soldiers from the Oxen Bucks Infantry Regiment of the 6th Airborne Division landed behind the front line, behind the beaches at a place called the Orne River Bridge. It was guarded by a German platoon. There was 2 guards on duty, the rest of them were sacked out. These gliders landed at 15 minutes after midnight. This was the first operation of Operation Overlord. The first glider landed 50 yards from the guard shack. The Germans were completely surprised. This painting shows a very gun being fired. This is a flare gun. The German guard was able to get out on a bridge and fire the flare, and then he was gunned down by the British paratroopers. The British landed 3 gliders on this side, 3 on the other side. They stormed the bridge, and within 30 minutes they had the bridge. This was important for the troops that landed later on the beach to get across the canal or the river. So it was called the Orne River Bridge. 6 Horsa gliders. Looks like I got a little too wide on that. That was the first phase of Operation Overlord. 15,000 paratroopers and gliders, soldiers, landed within the wee hours of the morning. They landed all over Normandy, behind the assault beaches on the Cotentin Peninsula. Many of them were scattered. Some of the paratroopers were 20 miles from their drop zones. They were scattered because of the heavy German anti-aircraft fire. The Germans knew something was going on. They weren't sure yet. They were still thinking the attack's going to be on the Pas de Calais. So they had not committed their mobile units inland. But the anti-aircraft defenses all over Normandy were firing in the sky. The pilots hit cloud banks, and it completely became misoriented. So what happened was you had thousands of Allied paratroopers and glidermen all over 10, 20 miles inland from the assault beaches, and this is at 1 o'clock in the morning. The Germans had no clue what's going on. There's a saying, the Allies knew what their objective was but didn't know where they were at. The Germans knew where they were at but didn't know what the Allies' objective were. So this is going on all morning long. They're seizing key and crucial intersections, roads, and bridges. At 6 o'clock in the morning, thousands of Allied ships arrive offshore. This is Sword Beach, one of the British beaches. Landing craft, initially from the Ranger battalions, land to take out artillery emplacements on the flanks of the beaches. The assault troops come in. The 29th Infantry Division, the American Division on Omaha Beach, where Donald landed, came under very, very heavy fire. The first company of American assault infantrymen from Virginia, 90% of them were killed or wounded. Many of them were brothers, as I said. They were all from little towns all over Virginia that had been in the National Guard. The other beaches, assaults were going better. But Omaha Beach, on the western edge of the assault beaches, was becoming very, very heavy. The Canadians landed under heavy fire but drove inland. The British landed on Gold and Sword Beaches under heavy fire but were moving inland. The British had special tanks. They called them funnies. The funnies were designed to breach obstacles. Sometimes they would carry racines, wooden aids to help get across ditches. They would carry flamethrowers. These tanks were really invaluable with the British on their beach to get in them. The American tanks were dropped offshore. They were equipped, they were called wading tanks. They were supposed to be dropped 1,000 yards from shore, wade in, get to the beach, drop their skirts. They had these skirts to prevent water from coming in, and then help the infantry clear the beaches. Well, most of them went under. When they were dropped them too far from the shore because the fire was so heavy. Most of them were dropped miles from the shore, and they never made it in. They went down with their crews. So we had 40 tanks on Omaha Beach that were supposed to be dropped. Most of them went to the bottom of the English Channel with their crews. So the American Infantry and the Engineer Brigade, which Donald was assigned to, the Engineer Brigade was to go in. Remember all these obstacles we talked about, the bunkers, the tetrahydrons? Their job was to clear those obstacles so that the vehicles and the infantry could get in and assault the beach. So all morning long, this fighting is back and forth, back and forth. Eisenhower at one point received a report that Omaha Beach was going, they weren't able to get off the beach. All the other beaches were successful, but Omaha Beach was going to be a failure. But without Omaha Beach, the entire operation would have been a failure because it effectively divided the beaches. A U.S. destroyer saw our troops struggling to try to get off the beach. And you know, when you go to a beach at Clear Creek, you got a 20-foot, beach area. This is Normandy, France. The beach area can be up to 300 yards. So the troops have to dismount from the landing craft. They have to charge 300 yards over open terrain with all these obstacles and all these bunkers pouring down fire on them. So they're having great difficulty getting off of the beach, and then you have a seawall. And then the Germans are on the high ground firing down on the beaches. A U.S. destroyer saw what was going on. The destroyer, the captain ordered, take the ship in. I don't care if we ground or not, we got to lay some fire on those bunkers. So a U.S. destroyer came in, the name escapes me at the moment, came in. That's the only attack the Germans were able to get up. The Allied, the Royal Air Force, the American Army Air Corps ruled the skies of Normandy. When the Germans tried to reinforce, they'd be strafed and dive bombed constantly and consistently. They could not move troops in the daytime. They had to move troops at nighttime. So, June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, probably, well, history's largest seaborne invasion. It'll never be repeated ever again. 100,000 troops landed, 10,000 killed in action, and by the end of the day, our flags were planted in France. Any questions about D-Day? Who was that cat that was in charge of the operation? General Eisenhower. Who was the German officer that was in charge of the German side? By the way, Rommel ended up getting strafed by the Royal Air Force. He got wounded. He was trying to get back to the front and got picked up by a Royal Air Force Hawker Hurricane, and his car was strafed. He was put in the hospital for months. He never went back to active service again.
How long did it take him to move all that across the English Channel to go unnoticed?
Well, see, that's you hit a very good point. Everything is calculated for surprise.
Yeah.
But they left. They had to leave at around 300 to 400 hours, 02, 03. When the paratroops were flying in to drop in, it's 40 miles from England to France. When the paratroops were flying, the ships were already in the channel. Because they could look down, they could see all the ships. They said there were so many ships, you could step out and walk all across. They started after midnight, staging and preparing. This is why when you conduct a large military operation like this, there's so many aspects you have to plan for. Surprise, the logistics. But once they took those beaches, and we just kept sending more forces, more supplies. They wanted Le Havre, France also. Le Havre was a harbor. We needed that harbor in northern France. So what the Germans believe, the attack in the Pas-de-Calais never occurred. The attack occurred in Normandy. Any other questions? Okay, what I want to do right now is, while we have a few minutes, again, Donald, very handsome at 94. Lee at 91. Donald landed on Omaha Beach, first wave. He was in the 500th Medical Clearing Company. And their job was to try to render aid, try to evacuate the Allied wounded and render aid until they could receive further medical aid. Lee landed after D-Day in France and fought as an infantryman all the way from France to Germany. And Donald went all the way from France to Germany also. So they both have incredible experiences, and perhaps you would like to ask them some questions. So now's the time to do it. This is an opportunity you won't have again. Not only are they good looking, they don't bite. So who's got a question for Donald? He's sharp, very sharp. Yes.
He was unarmed. Was he the one that was unarmed?
Yes.
How did they just defend him? Who defended you going into the beach? Were you on a boat after everyone else came through, or?
She wants to know who defended you when you were unarmed landing on the beach.
Yeah. How did you go through unarmed? Yeah.
I don't know.
Does that make sense?
She wants to know how you defended yourself on the beach with no weapon.
No way we defended ourselves. We were too busy helping guys that had been shot or.
They wore Red Cross armbands, their helmets. Some of them had Red Cross markings. The Geneva Convention, if it was honored, and the Germans were signatories to that, they weren't supposed to shoot medics, but it didn't happen. His captain was killed on the beach. A good question, yes.
How many wounded did you help?
Pardon?
How many wounded did you help?
How many?
How many wounded men did you help on D-Day?
I have absolutely no idea. It was something that we did the best we could, as quick as we could, and that was about the end of it.
Did you work on a lot of soldiers on D-Day? Did you work on a lot of soldiers on D-Day? Did you treat many soldiers?
I wouldn't have any idea.
Yeah.
What, how
He
many.
did a lot.
It was just something that we were there, and we just kept busy all the time. We could-
He's focused on his mission, so he doesn't have the ability to sit back and say, wow, I worked on 30 this hour, I worked on 20. He was busy the whole time he was there. And his landing was very rough also. The first two American soldiers that Donald encountered, he made it to the seawall, and the first two soldiers that he encountered had been killed. And
that was a shock to us because there was no way to prepare yourself for somebody that's wounded and can't help themselves.
and how old were you on D-Day, Donald?
How old? I don't know, maybe an old man like me.
He's about 21 years old on D-Day. Another question for,
Did you have a way to get the troops that were wounded out of the beach? What did you do with the wounded troops?
how did you get the wounded soldiers off the beach?
It was a touch and go thing for quite a while, but there was always a Higgins boat coming in with soldiers on it, and we would just ask them to pick up our wounded and take it out to hospitals.
He landed in the wrong place. Well, he didn't land where he was supposed to, like so many of them. And I think the first aid station was in a German trench. They set up a field hospital, and probably the first field hospital in Normandy was set up in a German anti-tank trench. Is that right, Donald? You remember that?
More or less right.
Yeah. Another question. Yes, sir.
Did he get wounded?
But
Did you get wounded during D-Day?
Did you get wounded?
no,
No.
no.
This is Donald, 1944. German prisoner of war sketched this. So hold that for him, Donald. This is Lee in 1944. So I'm going to ask Lee a question now. Lee, can you describe to everybody what it was like fighting in France? The terrain.
We were held up mostly by hedgerows, and a hedgerow is a fence. It's made of
I
Of,
had there once.
it's made of land piled up by bulldozers, and instead of having a barbed wire fence on the ground, on the level ground, they'd have a mound, maybe that high, around every farm. Every farm was just like a farm here, but it was surrounded by hedgerows. So that meant tanks, Jeeps, 2.5-ton trucks, 3-4-ton trucks, gliders couldn't get through. So they had to And in an amazing short time, they put big wedge blades on the front of the tanks, wiped right through those hedgerows, and away the troops went. So our headquarters that they showed there knew this was going to happen. They had the equipment ready if necessary, and mounted it on those tanks immediately, and so there was very little delay because of hedgerows. And then another thing, we started out building a huge headquarters tent, and that was useless because we were moving. You couldn't put a big tent down today and move 2 days and put another big tent down. So we just overtook the civilians' homes and had our headquarters in civilian homes, and we'd day to day go from home to home, and they might be partially damaged or destroyed, but it was enough building material for us to be bivouacked in for a day or two. Another problem was dead bodies. It was such a shock to all of us to see these dead bodies who hadn't been picked up and sent to the rear yet, because we were frontline troops. And you can't imagine the shock of an 18, 19, 20-year-old to see this and keep on moving and operate normally, what you had to do with all that problem.
Can you tell them what it was like to live in France in the Army? How you ate, and how you slept?
Well, just for example, I went from November to April without a hot meal, nothing but K rations. In the K rations were chocolate bars about that long, about that thick, and you could shave it into your helmet, heat your helmet in the water in the helmet, and mix in the chocolate and then drink it. I mean, we had to put up with things that you wouldn't do at home ever. But we survived because of it. We had to learn every day what to do in combat. Any other questions?
Hey Lee, back here. When you guys were in France, were they very happy to see you guys arrive? They've been under the pressure of the Germans the whole time, and since they're in late 30s, were they glad to see you guys come through, and were they nice to you, or how did they treat you when you were in France?
The French civilians treated us like gold. They had cognac and other drinks to hand out to the guys that wanted something to drink. It was just like a parade when we go through on our equipment. Because the line was moving fast, we'd go through real slow, but here they were, just thousands handing out all kinds of things, food and what they give their own what they needed for themselves to us because we had liberated them.
Donald, what's your recollection of France? What's your recollection of France in general?
We would, of course, being unarmed, we asked one of the people that has guns, we'd like to have that house for our aid station that we would constantly put up. I don't imagine it'd be, you could imagine somebody come knocking on your front door and say, move out, we're gonna take your house over, and, most of the people, of course, we had the guns, and most of the people, would, give us their home, and we would, make an aid station out of it usually, and we'd be in there for maybe a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, and by then we got to move again, and we weren't supposed to treat the French, or the Germans actually, and we didn't pay much attention to that.
What he's saying is they treated the Germans and the American soldiers both. As a medic, if someone was wounded or injured, they treated them both. They also worked with captured German medics who worked side by side with them.
Yeah, I, on the beach, I was sent, as soon as we captured the German, he went to work for us unloading boats, and so it, let's see, I was, somebody built a stockade from, some Americans built a stockade on the beach, and we put the German captured soldiers to work in that on that beach, and I right away was put in charge of you can imagine, charge of whole bunch of Germans and a stockade that I don't know how.
So Donald worked in the surgical ward as a surgical technician. Was that what your title was?
That was my,
Right. So, both these gentlemen, you know, there's a saying that says, I once was what you are, one day you will be what I am. Anybody know what that means? We'll all be their age someday in the autumn of our lives, you know. So when you're young, you gotta stay cognizant of this. You gotta think, wow, look at this old person in front of me in line at the grocery. He's kind of, you know, keep holding the line up, but where could he have been? He could have been on D-Day. He could have been an entryman. He could have been a prisoner in a concentration camp. He could have been a Marine. She could have been a nurse. So you know, you learn a lot from your elders. And this generation, 16 million Americans served in World War II. 16 million. Now there's 800,000 of them left now. So every month we lose veterans that we're affiliated with here at this museum. So, you know, you get these guys are national treasures. They were there. When people read about D-Day, it's kind of an abstract, you know, it's in the background. These guys were there. These guys were in France. They fought and they represented our nation. So I'd like to give them a hand for coming in today. And we're gonna We're go- All right, we're gonna wrap it up today. The next class will be on the home front. Justin Mays will be teaching that next Friday. I will be taking a World War II veteran to Atlanta, Georgia, a airborne soldier to receive an award. So he's gonna be getting an award. This is someone they know very well, Charles Davis. So, okay, Jeremy has an announcement.
Justin, Dave, and I discussed this a little bit already, and just to let you guys know, June 10th, which is the last class you guys have, we're going to play a Final Jeopardy game again, like what we did for midterm. So I want to tell you guys that now. We're still working on putting together the game and the questions, but I want to give you a heads up because everything that's going to be in that game is going to be based on all the classes from the last Jeopardy game up to the very last of the class. So study. The questions are going to get harder this time around, so study. There may be questions from Dave's presentation today on that game. So, in case you forget anything, I think Libby's daughter's been videotaping classes in the past and putting them on YouTube so you can watch it.
May 13th, we have a class, and we also have Valley View School coming in at 8:30 in the morning, the intermediate school. So our goal that day is to make this smooth. We'll talk about it a week out from that. Any other comments or questions?
I was just hoping that after this, they can remain seated and maybe we can get all the students behind them for a
Group
group
photograph.
photo.
As I said earlier, they give autographs also, so
And one more, did they know each other before they went, or where are they from?
Donald is originally from Bell Fountain, but lives in Germantown. Lee is from Middletown, and they never knew each other.
Okay.
So they know each other now through the museum. So Wednesdays at noon, about 10 World War II veterans always gather for lunch up here at KJ's restaurant. So if you ever get bored, you want to have some fun, show up at this lunch. It's hilarious. So, all right. Any other comments, questions? All right. Everybody have a good week.
Thank